Ryan was halfway through slicing vegetables when he heard the front door slam, a sound that always made his stomach clench. His father-in-law, Mark, marched into the kitchen, his face a storm cloud. In his hand, he was holding the disability check that had arrived just that morning. "So this is how you live now." Mark's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the refrigerator. He waved the envelope like an accusation, like a verdict on Ryan's worth. A grown man surviving off government money. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Before Ryan could even form a response, before he could explain the constant ache in his back or the physical therapy that wasn't working fast enough, Mark tore the check straight down the middle. The two halves fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. Ryan stared at them, his breath caught in his throat. The crisp white paper, now useless, lay scattered near his feet. Every morning he woke up with a deep, grinding pain in his lower back, a brutal reminder of the construction accident that had stolen his career, his livelihood. But this felt different. This cut deeper than any physical injury ever could. The familiar comfort of his own kitchen suddenly felt like a cage. The humiliation was a physical presence, pressing in on him from all sides. He didn't bend down to pick up the pieces. He couldn't, not yet. He just stood there, the knife still in his hand, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. Mark simply scoffed, turned on his heel, and walked out, leaving Ryan alone with the wreckage of his pride. Later that evening, Ryan's wife, Chloe, came home to a silent house. She found him sitting in the dimly lit living room, just staring at the wall. The torn pieces of the check were on the coffee table, a puzzle he hadn't tried to solve. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice full of a concern that both soothed and shamed him. He couldn't look at her. He just gestured toward the table. She picked up the pieces, her brow furrowing as she put the story together. "My dad," she whispered, more a statement than a question. Ryan nodded, the movement stiff. "He said I was a leech," Ryan finally managed to say, the words tasting like ash. "That I wasn't a real man anymore." Chloe sat beside him, her hand finding his. "It was cold. You know that's not true, Ryan." None of it, but the words, meant to comfort, bounced off the wall of shame he'd built around himself. The next few days were a blur of strained silence. Ryan avoided Mark, and by extension, he avoided everyone. He felt like a ghost in his own home. The unpaid bills on the counter seemed to mock him. The mortgage payment was due, the car needed repairs, and now, the money meant to cover it all was gone. The weight of it all was crushing. He started spending his days looking at job listings, anything from call centers to data entry, but every description seemed to require sitting for long hours, something his body screamed against. He felt trapped, a prisoner of his own physical limitations. One afternoon, Chloe came to him with a suggestion. "My cousin has a friend who does online marketing," she said hesitantly. "He works from home, sets his own hours. Maybe you could talk to him?" The idea felt foreign, almost absurd. Him, a construction worker, navigating the digital world, seemed impossible. Doubt was a constant companion, but desperation was a powerful motivator. He agreed to a video call, feeling awkward and out of place as he logged on. The man on the other side of the screen, David, was surprisingly down-to-earth. He listened patiently as Ryan stumbled through his story, not with pity, but with genuine understanding. "Look, man," David said, "I get it. The world feels like it's caved in. But what you have is an opportunity." He talked about affiliate marketing, about creating content, about building a small online business from scratch. He explained that the initial investment wasn't money, but time and effort. "You were a builder, right?" David asked. "Think of this as the same thing. You're just using different tools. Instead of hammers and nails, you're using words and ideas to build something for yourself." For the first time in months, a tiny spark flickered within Ryan. It wasn't a roaring fire of confidence, but it was something, It was a start. He decided to try. He spent hours watching tutorials, reading articles, absorbing everything he could. He started a small blog, writing about his recovery journey and the challenges of adapting to a new life. It was slow going. The first few weeks, his only reader was Chloe. He felt foolish, like he was shouting into the void. He almost quit a dozen times. Every time he saw his father-in-law, Mark's disapproving glare was a reminder of his perceived failure. But then, something shifted. A comment appeared on one of his posts. Someone who had gone through a similar injury wrote, "Thank you for sharing this. I thought I was the only one." Then another comment came, and another. He realized he wasn't just writing about his own pain. He was giving a voice to the silent struggles of others. His blog started to grow. He learned how to monetize it, placing small ads and affiliate links for products he genuinely used and believed in. A few months passed. The income was small at first, barely a trickle, but it was his. He had earned it, not with his back, but with his mind and his words. One evening, he was working on his laptop when Mark came over for dinner. Ryan braced himself for the usual criticism. But Mark just stood in the doorway of the living room, watching him type. "Still playing on your little computer?" he asked, though the usual venom was missing from his tone. Ryan didn't get defensive. He simply turned his screen toward Mark. "Actually, I'm working," he said calmly. He showed him the website, the articles, the growing community of readers. He even showed him the analytics page, the numbers slowly but steadily climbing. He pulled up his recent earnings report. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover the car payment. Mark was silent for a long time, just looking at the screen. He didn't apologize, not in words. But as he sat down for dinner that night, there was a different look in his eyes. It wasn't quite respect, not yet, but the contempt was gone. A year after the check was torn, Ryan's life was unrecognizable. His blog had become a thriving online business. He had created courses, built a loyal following, and was earning more than he ever did in construction. But it was never about the money. It was about reclaiming his sense of purpose. He had built a new life, brick by digital brick. One afternoon, another envelope arrived in the mail. It was a check, but this time it was from one of the companies he was affiliated with. It was for 5 figures. He was holding it when Chloe walked in, a smile spreading across her face. At that moment, the front door opened. It was Mark. He saw the check in Ryan's hand. He walked over, his steps slow and deliberate. Ryan's heart hammered in his chest, old wounds threatening to reopen. Mark stopped in front of him. He looked at the check, then at Ryan. The silence stretched, thick with a year of unspoken history. Ryan thought he saw a flicker of the old anger, the old disappointment. But then, Mark did something that shocked him. He reached out, not to tear the check, but to clap Ryan on the shoulder. He looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time, Ryan saw genuine pride. "I was wrong," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you've done? You're more of a man than I ever gave you credit for. You're a builder, Ryan. You always were." In that moment, the final piece of the torn-up check from a year ago finally clicked into place. The wound wasn't just healed, it was gone. He hadn't just built a business, he had rebuilt himself. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. Let me know in the comments what you thought about Ryan's journey. We'll see you in the next one. A few minutes later, the front door swung open with a bang, and Emma rushed in, her face flushed and her breathing heavy. She dropped her keys on the counter with a clatter and fixed her gaze on her father. "Dad, what did you just do?" Her voice was tight, a mix of disbelief and anger. Mark, who had been staring out the window, turned around. He shrugged, a casual gesture that was completely at odds with the tension in the room. "I taught him a lesson," he said, his tone self-righteous. He needs motivation, not some government handout. Sitting around all day isn't going to fix anything. A man needs to provide, to work. I was just trying to light a fire under him. Until that moment, Ryan had been silent, a statue of controlled fury in his wheelchair. But now, he finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air with a chilling coldness that made both Emma and Mark freeze. "I paid taxes for 20 years, he began, his eyes locked on Mark. "For 2 decades, I got up before the sun and came home after dark. I carried lumber on broken fingers because calling in sick wasn't an option. I worked double shifts, sometimes sleeping in my truck between them, just so we could afford the down payment on our first house." He wheeled himself forward slightly, closing the distance between them. The quiet whir of the chair was the only sound. "That check you so casually dismissed," he continued, his voice low and dangerous. "That's not charity. It's not a handout. It's what the system owes me after I broke my spine for a job that did unprotect me. It's the insurance I paid into week after week, year after year, hoping I'd never have to use it. It's the promise that if the worst happened, my family wouldn't starve." Emma moved to stand beside her husband, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. She folded her arms, her expression hardening as she looked at her father. "Dad, you don't get to do this. You don't get to walk into our home, a home that Ryan's hard work paid for, and decide what makes him a man. His worth isn't measured by a paycheck anymore. It's measured by his courage, by the fact that he gets up every single day and faces a life he never asked for, with more grace than you've shown in the last 10 minutes. Mark's confident expression faltered. He looked from his daughter's defiant face to his son-in-law's unwavering stare. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, he seemed unsure, the certainty that had fueled his actions just moments before draining away. The silence stretched between the three of them, heavy and honest. The unspoken words, the years of resentment and misunderstanding, hung in the air. Finally, Mark looked away, unable to meet their eyes. He shifted his weight, his gaze falling to the floor. The blustering know-it-all father was gone, replaced by an old man who suddenly looked very out of place. I just wanted to help," he mumbled, the words sounding weak, even to his own ears. "Help?" Emma's voice was incredulous. "By belittling him? By telling him he's not good enough because his body failed him? That's not help, Dad. That's cruelty." She took a deep breath, trying to calm the tremor in her voice. "Ryan is in pain every single day. Physical pain you can't even imagine, but the pain you just inflicted on him, that's a different kind. You questioned his identity, his contribution to this family." Ryan's hand found Emma's, his grip surprisingly strong. He gave her a small, reassuring squeeze. He looked back at Mark, and the cold anger in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, profound weariness. "Mark," he said, his voice now just tired, "I know you come from a generation where a man's value was tied to his labor. I respected that. I lived by that code my entire life. But my life has changed. I have to find a new way to be a husband, a new way to be a father to our future kids. And I have to do it while fighting a body that feels like a prison. The last thing I need is for my own family to be the ones rattling the bars." The weight of his words settled in the room. Mark swallowed hard, the truth of Ryan's statement hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He saw the struggle behind Ryan's eyes, the daily battle that he had so carelessly dismissed. He saw the fierce loyalty in his daughter's stance, a loyalty he had just betrayed. He had come here to fix a problem, but he had only succeeded in breaking something far more precious: trust. I'm sorry," Mark said, the apology a quiet whisper. It felt inadequate, a tiny bandage on a gaping wound, but it was all he had. "Sorry doesn't fix it, Dad. Not this time." I think you should leave. Her words were not spoken in anger, but with a finality that left no room for argument. It was a clear boundary being drawn in the sand. Mark nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He picked up his coat, not looking at either of them. He walked to the door, his steps heavy. Before he left, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. I didn't understand, he said, his back still to them. Then he opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the silent room. Emma let out a long, shuddering breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She knelt down in front of Ryan's chair, taking both of his hands in hers. Are you okay? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. Ryan looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He shook his head, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path down his cheek. No, he admitted, his voice cracking. But I will be. Because I have you. Emma leaned in and rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes. In the quiet of their living room, surrounded by the life they had built together, they held on to each other. The storm had passed, for now, but they both knew the damage was done. The relationship with Emma's father was fractured, perhaps irreparably. But as they sat there together in the aftermath, they were reminded of what truly mattered. It wasn't about the job, the money, or the approval of others. It was about facing the world with all its challenges and heartbreaks, side by side. It was about finding strength, not in what they had lost, but in what they still had, each other. The road ahead was still long and uncertain. Ryan's recovery was a marathon, not a sprint. There would be more doctor's appointments, more physical therapy, more days filled with pain and frustration. And now, they had to navigate the minefield of their family relationships. Could Mark ever truly understand their reality? Could they ever forgive him? These were questions without easy answers. But as the evening sun cast long shadows across their living room floor, a sense of resolve settled over Ryan. His father-in-law's words, as hurtful as they were, had inadvertently sparked something in him. Not the motivation to find a new job, but a different kind of fire. A determination to redefine his own worth on his own terms. He was more than his injury. He was a husband, a partner, a survivor. His battle was not just against his physical limitations, but against the outdated perceptions of the world and even of his own family. And it was a battle he was not going to lose. Emma, sensing this shift in him, squeezed his hands tighter. They didn't need to say anything else. In the shared silence, they found a renewed strength, a quiet promise to face whatever came next, together. The path forward was theirs to create, and they would walk it hand in hand. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. We'll see you in the next video. Ryan knelt, not in shame, but in a quiet act of defiance. He picked up the torn pieces of the check, one by one. Each fragment felt like a piece of his own shattered pride, but as he gathered them, something shifted. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about ownership. He rose to his feet, his back straight despite the dull ache that had settled in his bones. He walked over to a small wooden drawer and placed the torn scraps inside. It was a symbolic act, a closing of one painful chapter. Emma's voice was soft but steady beside him. We'll get it reissued, she said, her hand finding his. We'll be fine. Her words were a balm, a reminder that they were a team, that this setback was just a detour, not a dead end. Ryan nodded, squeezing her hand, a silent thank you for her unwavering belief in him. But his gaze shifted, moving past her to land on Mark. He looked at Mark, truly looked at him for the first time since the outburst. He saw not just the anger and the resentment, but the fear beneath it all. The fear of being left behind. The fear of inadequacy. It was a fear Ryan knew all too well. Being a man isn't about never falling, Mark, Ryan said, his voice calm and even, cutting through the tense silence. It's not about having a perfect record or never making a mistake. He held Mark's gaze, letting the weight of his words sink in. It's about standing up, especially when someone else tries to push you down. It's about getting back on your feet, dusting yourself off, and taking the next step. No matter how hard it is. Mark's mouth opened, a retort or perhaps an excuse on his lips. But then he closed it. A flicker of something new crossed his face, a crack in the hardened exterior. It wasn't remorse, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. The seed of a different perspective had been planted. Ryan didn't wait for an apology. He didn't need one. An apology born of obligation would be as worthless as the torn check in the drawer. What he needed, he already had. He had his dignity, something no amount of shouting or tearing could take away. He had his partner, Emma, his rock and his reason. And he had a future. It was a future he was actively rebuilding, piece by piece, decision by decision, just like that check. The next morning, the house was quiet. The air was still thick with unspoken words, but the storm had passed. Ryan found Emma in the kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee waiting for him. They didn't rehash the events of the previous night. They didn't need to. Instead, they talked about their next steps. They made a list, a practical, tangible plan. Call the bank, contact a client, reschedule the project timeline. Each item they wrote down was another step forward, another piece of their future being put back into place. Later that day, Ryan was in his workshop, sketching out new designs. The familiar feel of the pencil in his hand, the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut wood. It was his sanctuary. The door creaked open, and Mark stood there, hesitating on the threshold. He looked different, smaller somehow, without the armor of his anger. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just looked around the workshop, at the half-finished projects, the tools neatly hung on the wall, the evidence of hours of labor and love. I looked at your portfolio online, Mark finally said, his voice barely a whisper. The one you had before everything. Ryan stopped sketching, but didn't turn around. And it was good, Mark admitted. Really good. I never told you that. It wasn't an apology, but it was something more. It was an acknowledgement. Ryan turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Thank you. Dad always said you had the talent, Mark continued, taking a hesitant step into the room. He was proud of you, I think. I think I was just jealous. It all came so easy to you, or at least it looked that way. Easy? Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh. Nothing about it was easy, Mark. I worked day and night. I failed more times than I can count. The only difference is, I didn't let the failures define me. He walked over to a dusty cabinet in the corner and pulled out an old, beat-up box. He opened it, revealing a collection of broken pieces of wood, mangled joints, and failed prototypes. This is my graveyard of mistakes, Ryan said, gesturing to the contents. For every beautiful piece I've ever made, there are 10 of these. This is the part nobody sees. This is the easy part you're talking about. Mark stared into the box, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. He was seeing beyond the finished product, beyond the illusion of effortless success, and for the first time, he was seeing the truth of the struggle. He was seeing his brother. I'm sorry, Ryan, he said, and this time the words were heavy with sincerity. For the check. For everything. Ryan nodded, closing the box and putting it away. The past was where it belonged. I know. That evening, the three of them sat down for dinner. The tension was gone, replaced by a fragile but genuine sense of peace. They talked about the future, but this time it was a shared vision. Mark, humbled and more introspective, even offered to help Ryan rebuild his business, suggesting ways he could use his own skills in marketing to help find new clients. It was a small offer, but it was a bridge. The journey ahead was still long. Trust, once broken, takes time to mend. A business once lost takes effort to rebuild. But as Ryan looked at Emma, his steadfast partner, and at Mark, his brother, who was finally finding his way back, he felt a surge of hope stronger than any he had felt in months. He hadn't just lost a business, he had lost a part of himself. In the process of rebuilding, he was not just piecing together a career, but also his family and his own sense of self-worth. The torn check in the drawer was no longer a symbol of loss. It was a reminder. A reminder that sometimes things have to be completely broken before they can be put back together, stronger than they were before. He was rebuilding his life, not from the ashes of his failure, but from the foundation of his resilience. Piece by painful, hopeful piece. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores the ups and downs of life. We all face challenges, but it's how we rise from them that truly defines us. See you in the next video.